The most dangerous thing a Victorian parent could do was to love their child. That sentence sounds cruel, almost inhuman. But in Victorian life, love was not a promise of the future. It was a wager. Having a child did not mean watching them grow. It meant accepting the possibility that you would outlive them. This was not an abstract fear. It was a quiet calculation carried every single day. A child could be healthy today and gone tomorrow, without warning, without explanation. And when that possibility becomes part of daily life, attachment changes its meaning. Love stops feeling safe. It stops feeling natural. It starts to feel like exposure. In a world where children often died suddenly, emotional closeness was no longer just tenderness. It was vulnerability. And when vulnerability becomes constant, people do not stop feeling. They start protecting themselves, not by loving less, but by trying to survive what comes next. To understand why love felt so dangerous, we first need to understand how ordinary death actually was. In the 19th century, death was not something that interrupted life. It was woven into it. Children did not die occasionally. They died routinely. On average, 30 to 40% of children never reached the age of 5. In poor urban families, nearly every second child was lost. These were not distant numbers. They were faces, cradles that became empty, beds that stayed untouched. Children died from fever, from infection, from cold, from water that poisoned them slowly, from illnesses that today would barely be noticed. Often there was no warning, no time to prepare, no time to say goodbye. A child could be laughing in the morning and wrapped in cloth by night. Most parents did not experience this once. They experienced it repeatedly. One small coffin after another, one name crossed out, another room growing quiet. This was not seen as a personal tragedy. It was seen as the cost of life, especially among the poor, where sickness moved freely, where there were no doctors, no medicine, no separation between illness and home. Death happened where people ate, where they slept, where children played. It was witnessed, it was remembered, it was expected. And when loss becomes that frequent, something inside you begins to change. You do not stop caring, you stop assuming. You learn that love does not protect, that hope does not guarantee survival. And in a world where the odds were always against you, loving a child fully was no longer instinctive. It was a deliberate emotional risk, one that many parents knew they might not survive again. Fear did not forbid love outright. Instead, it taught parents to hesitate. One of the quietest ways this fear revealed itself was through something that should have been simple: a name. In many Victorian families, newborn children were not named immediately, sometimes not for weeks, sometimes not for months. They were called the baby, or referred to without a name at all. This was not forgetfulness, and it was not cruelty. A name meant recognition. Recognition meant identity, and identity invited attachment. To name a child was to acknowledge them as someone who would be remembered if they were lost. So parents waited. They waited until the most dangerous months had passed, until the child had survived long enough to feel less temporary, until hope felt slightly safer. This hesitation was not about denying the child's existence. It was about delaying the moment when loss would become personal, because losing a baby was not the same as losing someone with a name, and every name made grief heavier. So love did not begin with affection. It began with restraint, with caution, with silence. But postponing attachment was only the first layer of protection, because once a child survived long enough to be named, the question was no longer whether to love, it was how much. In Victorian culture, affection itself was treated with suspicion. Tenderness was believed to weaken children, to make them fragile, too dependent, too unprepared for a world that showed no mercy. But this belief was not only about discipline, it was about survival. Affection deepened attachment. Attachment intensified loss. A child who was held often, comforted often, loved openly, would not simply be mourned more deeply if they died. They could break the parent who lost them. And that kind of grief was not seen as tragic. It was seen as dangerous. In that world, overwhelming sorrow was not interpreted as love. it was interpreted as loss of control. So restraint was praised, distance was framed as responsibility. Parents were taught that closeness spoiled children, but what it truly threatened was the emotional stability of the adult. Discipline was presented as care, control as protection, not because parents felt less, but because feeling fully was considered reckless. In a society already shaped by constant loss, affection was no longer innocent. It was a risk that had to be managed. And yet, love did not disappear. Something far more unsettling happened instead. Love did not vanish. It changed its shape. Love did not disappear in Victorian families. It was translated. Affection was replaced with function, emotion with routine, closeness with obligation. Care became something you did, not something you showed. Feed the child, clothe them, teach them discipline, prepare them for the world. These actions could be repeated even when feelings were tightly controlled. Duty was safer than affection. It had limits, it had structure. It could be performed without falling apart. Love, expressed as feeling, was unpredictable. It overflowed, it lingered, it made loss impossible to contain. So parents learned to measure care in tasks, not in tenderness. A good parent was not the one who loved deeply, but the one who fulfilled their role correctly. This form of love looked cold from the outside, but inside that world, it was considered the most reliable version available, because duty could survive what affection could not. And yet, even this careful transformation of love was not entirely a private choice. Something else was watching. Victorian parenting did not exist in private. It existed under observation. Families were watched by neighbors, by relatives, by the community that surrounded them. How parents behaved toward their children mattered, but how they reacted to loss mattered even more. Too much attachment raised concern. Too much grief raised suspicion. Emotional restraint was admired. Self-control was treated as a moral quality. A parent who appeared composed was seen as respectable. A parent who broke down was seen as unstable. The death of a child could be accepted, but visible collapse could not. Grief was expected to follow rules, quiet rules, unspoken rules. You were allowed to mourn, but only to a certain extent, only in approved ways, only for a limited time. Anything beyond that was no longer sympathy, it became discomfort. And once grief made others uncomfortable, it stopped being a private emotion. It became something that was judged. And in that moment, the meaning of the child's death no longer belonged to the parents alone. When a child died, it was rarely treated as an accident. It was interpreted. Death was read as evidence, as a sign that something had gone wrong. Someone must have failed. Someone must have been careless. Someone must have made the wrong choices. This judgment did not need to be spoken. It existed in looks, in silence, in what was no longer said. A grieving parent was not just mourning. They were being examined. Every reaction was observed, every tear measured, every moment of restraint noted. Too much emotion looked suspicious, too little looked unnatural. And love, expressed too openly, could be read as guilt, as overcompensation, as proof that something had been done wrong before. In that moment, the death of a child stopped being a personal loss. It became a verdict, a statement about the household, about discipline, about control. And once death began to speak that way, distance was no longer just protection. It was defense. It is easy to look back at this distance and judge it, because we live in a world where the future feels more stable, where survival is more likely than loss, where loving a child does not usually mean preparing for their death. But the fear that shaped Victorian parents never truly disappeared. It simply learned to hide. It hides in hesitation, in emotional restraint, in the instinct to protect ourselves from pain before it arrives. We still calculate risk. We still fear attachment. We just use different language for it. When we look at Victorian parents, we see emotional coldness. But what we may actually be seeing is a familiar fear, one that was expressed without comfort, without illusion, and without distance from death. They did not believe love could save them. They believed only control could. And if this story stayed with you longer than you expected, if it felt uncomfortably close rather than safely historical, there are more videos on this channel exploring the same quiet corners of the past, stories about how people tried to survive what they could not explain, could not prevent, and could not control. Quiet stories, uncomfortable ones, deeply human. We'd be glad to have you continue watching with us.